I'm known for menopause, natural health, and community support. But can I tell you something? I despise the word healthy eating. It just doesn't mean anything to me. It's too vague. It's too vague to be of any use to anyone. I grew up in the days of calorie controlled, low fat, and whole grain everything. And we were told that that was the best way to be. We thought we were doing the right things for ourselves. But, you know, knowledge changes, research changes, people change. And if we don't keep up with that, then we fall by the wayside. And when we know better, we can do better, right? But you don't know what you don't know. Nutrition these days is a profit-driven industry in itself, but the research has given us lots of good stuff to be able to inform a better way of doing it than healthy eating. It's just too general. I don't think I'll ever make that term go away, but what I prefer to use is things like helpful foods, less helpful foods, or hormonally helpful foods, because as women, we need something a bit more specific than just healthy eating. We need to take our internal chemistry into account. And I'm not talking about crazy diets or anything extreme, but it is about addressing what has changed. Nobody stays the same forever. We all change on the inside, and yet the term healthy eating and 5 a day or 10,000 steps a day, it seems to be a very generalistic way of thinking about creating health in our own body. And I know that we all have to start somewhere, and maybe that's a good place to start, but as a woman in midlife, we are not at our starting point, are we? We've got a bit more knowledge about what we need. We've got knowledge about ourselves. We've had a few experiences. So it's important that we take all of that together along with the research that has informed us of what's actually changed in our body. I mean, aside from the crazy hormones, there's other stuff as well. And that can all change and influence and mean that we have additional nutritional needs now. And when we don't take that into account, when we continue to eat the same things in the same way, then we notice more challenges cropping up. It might be about weight gain, it might be about energy levels or sleep, it might even be some of the emotional stuff, the stuff that's going on in your head. It's not just in your head, it's a physiological thing, and there's many ways to address it, but we've all got to eat, right? Everybody eats, I hope. So why don't we start at least at some point? I mean, we're not right at the beginning. We all know what healthy means. But if we take that a step further and take that into a hormonally healthy, or as I like to say, hormonally helpful way, then those foods are not just about the foods. It's about a way of eating as well. And it doesn't have to be, okay, that sounds a bit like I'm going to ask you to eat off your best china. You can do that if you want. But what I really mean is to address the changes physiologically, chemically, biochemically, all these different aspects of ourselves that mean more now in midlife. We have to address that, otherwise we will see more hormonal challenges. I just want to give you an example and tell you about a client. Let's call her Nicola. And I'm going to use a couple of clients actually for this and their experiences and their backgrounds just to explain what I mean. And Nicola came to me via email, as a lot of my clients do, to ask what else can she do to help herself, because she felt like she was eating the right things. She felt like she was doing the exercise. As a woman in midlife, she had older parents and still children who had left the nest, but they were still dependent on her in many ways, and that's really common situation to be in. So she was struggling for time for herself to do stuff, for herself, but she was somehow managing to squeeze in some exercise, choir practice every week, and take the dog out as well every day. So she was finding that she was rushing often from one thing to other, going to hospital appointments with parents, trying to support her children in various projects that they were involved with, and she was driving around quite a lot, and found that she was, when we talked about it, she was actually eating on the go, eating her meals in the car quite a lot of the time, and then at work sitting at her desk also eating whilst checking emails and just catching up on work generally. So before we talked about what she was having for lunch at her desk or what she was eating in the car, I didn't even ask her about that. I just asked her if she's a fast or a slow eater, and if she was aware which category she sometimes might fall in. And I know there's a continuum on that. We're not always one or the other. In different situations we can be somewhere along that scale, but generally she found that she was quite a fast eater because meal times were another job to do. It was something else to get through. Although it was a bit of a break, a bit of a time out for her, it was also, eating in the car, because she didn't want to be late for an appointment or she was on the way to work. So this was the first point that we addressed before we even talked about what it was she was eating, because it's so important that we think about who we are being when we are eating, rather than it just being all about the calories, the macros, whether it's healthy or not. And sure, that's a conversation that some people might like to have, but if you're into the calories and stuff and all of that, that's not my way at all. I know that is relevant and it's important to address, but it's not where I start. So I asked Nicola what would help her to be able to slow down a little bit at some meal times and be able to have that as digestion time, not just multitasking time to drive or to work. And she said, well, I've never really thought about it before, but I suppose I eat a bit slower when I'm around other people, when I'm in other people's company. So that was our starting point. That's what we started to explore, and it wasn't too long. It took a couple of weeks, and she was noticing that she was putting more emphasis on enjoying the food and not just getting through it as another job to do. This is important. It's not just a nice feeling. It's not just another task on the list. It's actually sending signals to your brain, to your body, by your chemistry. And there's hormones and neurotransmitters involved in this as well. It's sending messages that you're in a position where you're able to not only be able to eat, but also digest it properly. And you're not in that fight, flight, freeze response where your body has kind of shielded itself, and you're withholding resources from yourself because you're not able to digest properly. Use that food to make hormones, to repair the body systems, to provide it with energy. And it's a downward spiral if we're continually eating in that way. So instead of it being about what I've eaten or what I should be eating or what I'm about to eat, we start to think about who you're being, and you've got direct control of that. It puts it more in a curiosity perspective, which is always a great place to be. My client Nicola was frustrated with herself, but also felt like she was battling her mind and her body quite a bit, because she felt like the things she was eating and doing were all the same, and yet she was feeling heavier, she was feeling more tired, she was finding it a struggle to get up in the morning. And she just felt like she was getting a bit out of control, and it was worrying her because she knew at the end of her, as she was at that point in her late 40s, that she was starting to worry about where it might be leading and how bad it might get. So I helped her to understand how hormonal changes fitted into that and how our whole metabolism changes. So it becomes not just about the food, it becomes about what's estrogen doing, what's progesterone doing, what's cortisol doing, and I helped her to put it into that bigger picture so that she could understand what was under her control. Because so often when we're talking about menopause, we have this whole narrative around it just happening to us rather than us being able to have any say in that. It's a very disempowering way of talking about it, but so common as well because nobody's really taught us to talk about it in any other way. But I'm always trying to help women who come to me as a client or just as for some advice to help them switch that around so they can start to understand what part they play in it. Again, we're trying to move away from the guilt and the shame. Responsibility is more helpful in terms of empowerment. What else can I do about this? How can I make space for this? How can I make room for it in my own mind? What do I doubt is working that I'm trying and trying and trying? And could there be another way? These are all more helpful than thinking about it as something that just happens to us. The hormones are all declining and it's all gone to shit and there's nothing I can do about it. Because honestly, that's just not true. And I get that it could be overwhelming, me sitting here talking about all the different avenues and aspects that could help you with menopause. But there again, we have to start somewhere. We have to pick one avenue to go down and really go for it. So that's what we did with Nicola. And we didn't start with the food choices. We could have started talking about estrobolome bacteria. We could have started talking about constipation and how that links in with hormonal balance and hormonal challenges. We could have been talking about foods to be able to sleep better. No, we didn't start there. We went on to those later on, but we started at who are you being when you are eating? Because we needed a lead in, and that was the one that got her curiosity going. And then in later calls, we were able to talk about which foods are more or less hormonally helpful and putting some of the science around that. So it gave her a reason why. It wasn't just a list of foods to eat or a diet to follow. No woman needs another diet to follow. It's not the answer. We need to understand what's going on in here, in this body that is constantly changing. When you understand what's happening in here, we can start to make the changes for ourselves. It becomes more common sense then. But you don't know what you don't know. This is why I wrote the Wise Eating course for women, because it's a bit of a food empowerment course for us as we move through midlife. So it's relevant for anyone over the age of 35, which is when our hormones start to change and get ready for peri-menopause. And it's relevant right through up to 70s, I would say, so that we take into account what's going on. And if you're the kind of person who likes to know the reasons why I give the advice that I do, and why it's not just all about estrogen, then this course is going to be really helpful and interesting. It's not just a list of recipes and foods to eat. I want to help you understand what's going on in your own body so that you can start to feel more in control of symptoms and challenges, whether they're physical, mental, emotional. All of it's affected by food. But if we keep on eating in the same way behaviorally, and also the same types of foods that we're eating all through our lives, that doesn't give us any insurance against those hormonal changes. If you want to get your hands on that course, I would love to be able to give it to you. I'll put the link below.